You needed to check all the metrics for like how the job queue was running, and looking at all those things individually can like be distracting from actually trying, and it can make it hard to understand what like the root cause is of an issue compared to in Temporal, where we have these like extensive observability tools that we can offer teams.
I'm here with Mitch Wagner from MongoDB. Mitch, can you tell me about what it is that your team works on at Mongo?
Yeah. So I work on Atlas. So like Atlas is our cloud managed like database offering. And specifically over the past year, I've been working on our async runtime team. Our async runtime team was responsible for like evolving our job queue system. So our job queue system was sort of this like homegrown system that started at the beginning of Atlas to manage all the like asynchronous processes. And over the past year, I've been helping to integrate Temporal as a replacement for this job queue.
Okay, super interesting. What does operational excellence look like for MongoDB Atlas?
Okay, that's funny. I guess operational excellence is a meeting that we have every month to talk about sort of like go over like do like root cause analysis of like issues and try to make sure that we are meeting our operational excellence goals. Some of those things look like, I guess we call them like the big four things: security, durability, availability, and performance. So those are sort of like the primary goals that we have for running all of our systems across Atlas. For the job queue specifically, I guess that means
if things go wrong, what kind of impact does that have on the customers or the users of Atlas?
Yeah. So when things go, so like I guess our job queue system is used by the different Atlas teams to operate their workloads. And when things go wrong, that directly impacts our customers. Some of the like primary jobs that get run in the job queue are things like cluster provisioning, things like collecting billing data, things like sending alerts to customers. So these are all like core functions that if they're not working, customers are impacted, I guess.
Okay, got it. So you're in a platform team and you're building the technology that enables other teams at Mongo to deliver quality of service ultimately to the end users of the Atlas product.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, makes sense. So it sounds like this system was first built without Temporal, and then later you switched to Temporal. Is that right?
Okay. So we're kind of in the process of like migrating things to Temporal right now, but where we like started as like the reason that we wanted to migrate to Temporal was sort of like kicked off this process of like discovering and exploring Temporal as a platform to replace this job queue.
So what does it look like kind of before, and then if we think about what after looks like for the Temporal implementation, could you kind of compare those?
Yeah, I guess what I wanted to talk about a little bit was our control plane. So the Atlas control plane is like where all these operations happen, and the job queue powers things in the Atlas control plane. Our control plane is written in like a monolithic like code base. So basically like all teams are just operate like running code and as one big service. The Atlas control plane operates as one big service. And because we've been like growing so quickly, we want to give individual teams like ownership of their services. And so this sort of like created a problem for us because we wanted to move to this like service-oriented architecture, I guess, from like monolith, where teams operate and like deploy their own services independently, right? And the job queue is like inherently like tied into this like monolith architecture, and we don't have the ability to like easily extend it to support like these individual services, basically. So the way that the job queue works is it just basically you can think of it as like we have one MongoDB cluster that like similar to like the persistence layer of like Temporal. That is where we store like job documents. So a job document kind of just like contains this is the type of job that we want to run, and this is like where we want to run it. And then we have these like workers that pull these jobs out of this like jobs database. And these workers like actually execute the logic in something called like a job handler. So that sort of like is like a simple implementation, but that doesn't support, say, like having a separate somebody. Say we create like a payment service, the payments team creates their payment service, and they want to like insert jobs into this database. Currently, they have to be operating in the monolith in order to use the job queue. So we wanted to sort of like think about like how do we evolve the job queue to support these needs of these like individual services. I mean, I guess, so that was sort of like the I guess not necessarily like a problem, but that was like the moment where we decided we needed to come up with some like evolution for this. We defined like a North Star for what we wanted in this like second version of the job queue if we were to build it ourselves, right? So some of the things we saw people doing in the job queue were things like workflow orchestration. So people were building on top of this like primitive job queue or like elementary job queue their own like orchestration layer for workflows. So they were chaining jobs together and like managing the state themselves and managing retry policies themselves. And when we noticed like every team was sort of like building their own like workflow orchestration systems and managing them, and the burden of having to like run these systems or like debug them when things go wrong is hard when it's not uniform. So I don't know, I guess that is like one of the things. Like I don't know, there's like a few things I guess that I would say were things we wanted to evolve our job queue with, and that's why we like chose Temporal to meet those needs.
That's interesting. So was there at some point an explicit build versus buy discussion?
Yeah, definitely.
Around Temporal?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we sort of like went through all these like things that we wanted to build ourselves and estimated how long that would take us and what the sort of like keep the lights on would be to like be able to maintain the system in the future. And ultimately like the cost of Temporal comes down to like it's better for us to invest in this platform rather than like waste developer years and developer time that could be spent building other features for Atlas. Yeah.
And it sounds like in addition to delivering reliability, you're also leaning on Temporal to have developer productivity, to have kind of that internal software architecture that lets teams move fast. Is that right?
Exactly. We want teams to be able to have like ownership over things. So it's sort of like about that like service-oriented architecture. The idea is that we want teams to have full ownership end to end like of their workloads. And in like our previous like job queue model, our team was sort of responsible for making sure that like all these pieces of like the job queue are running, and it's like easy to, I don't know, like shift like blame, I guess, between like an owning team and like a platform team on like, and try to figure out like where the exact problem is. Yeah.
Cool. Now I know Temporal is still rolling out, but have you seen any differences in terms of the on-call life and what that looks like sort of before and after?
Yeah, I would say, so like one of these other features of Temporal that I think is like executed really well is like observability. And this is something that was kind of like really, or I guess really limited in our job queue system. These observability tools, like having the web UI, having a CLI, being able to see like detailed workflow, like event histories, being able to check activities, see the state, see sort of like what happened, what workers they were assigned to, how like the retries took place. Having that as part of like your debugging when you are on call is something that's like super important. And in our job queue system, that was just something we didn't have. Job documents were like didn't maintain that sort of like history. So it was kind of like if you needed to figure out what was wrong, you needed to like look into the jobs database. You needed to check all the metrics for like how the job queue was running. And looking at all those things individually can like be distracting from actually trying, and can make it hard to understand what like the root cause is of an issue compared to in Temporal, where we have these like extensive observability tools that we can offer teams. And I think that like sort of speaks to us being able to operate this system like more confidently, I guess.
So it sounds like the observability is a key part of giving you confidence that your system is working the way it should. Yeah. One more question. Is there any advice that you have for teams that are perhaps, one incident away from needing Temporal to maybe help them get ahead of that decision?
Yeah, definitely. I would say weigh your options. It's hard to make like this. It can be hard to make like the decision because of like cost or I don't know other factors, I guess.
So it can be hard to make the decision, perhaps because of inertia, or learning a technology.
Yeah, or I don't know. I guess something that even like people at this like conference have been talking about is sort of this idea that it's easy to like continue building a system and like extending it until it breaks, I guess, sort of. So like when we think about like the job queue, like when it started, we only needed like simple jobs, and that was kind of all that we needed, and that was fine. So like that choice at the time made sense. So like we've been making these like deliberate choices to extend the system over time, and I think it's important to like step in and say, at what point are we like extending this too much, and at what point is it going to like fail? At what point is it going to break? And that kind of is like the decision point between like, this is the time that we switch to temporal, I guess. Yeah.
So you're thinking about really when to invest in a future-proof platform. And okay.
Yeah.
Mitch, thanks so much for coming here.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great meeting you and talking about temporal.